No, 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 white Trini soul. No, 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 white Trini soul. Okay, hi, good evening, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. Okay, I just realized that I'm having some mild audio glitches going on there, so such is life. Hi, Anne. Hi, Daryl. Hi, Miriam. Hi, Patrice. Hi, Melissa. And to all of the other folks, because it's about 5 or 6 of you that have hailed me up, but there are 95 persons here already. 110, sorry. I'm sure the numbers will be higher than that in a little bit. So thank you to all of you for joining me. So last week, we would have talked about Boise Singh. And we talked about Boise Singh's reign of terror, as it were, from 1947 to 1957. And that's because I wanted you guys to have a sense of what crime and criminal activity was like here. Well, I guess from the perspective of the leading person, the leading crime kingpin at that point in time, prior to independence, prior to 1962. But there's something that would have influenced Boise Singh, or certainly influenced the culture of Trinidad and Tobago at the point in time that Boise Singh rose to prominence, and that's World War II. And why World War II? I mean, because it was happening all the way over in Europe, really. But World War II, because we were occupied by the Americans from 1941 till about 1947, thereabouts. I think that's when they packed up shop and headed out. But if I have the information wrong, I have a historian on site here who will set me straight. So, this evening we're going to continue the conversation talking about the impact of World War II and how it would have shaped our tastes and how things continue to happen here. And I was fortunate enough to be able to get a friend of mine, colleague, you all know him as the former MP of Moruga Tableland and the former minister in the Ministry of Education, and many of you would know him as Dr. Lovell Francis as well. It is midnight his time. It is 3 minutes past midnight, but he is up and awake and looking to join me. So, hi Lovell, how you doing?
Hey, not too bad. Good morning, Rhoda, from South Africa.
Morning. How is it going? How is settling in been for you?
Not too bad. I arrived on Wednesday
Uh-huh.
with boundless energy.
Uh-huh.
So I was fine Wednesday, I was fine Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
By Friday, I think this thing called jet lag was kicking in, and then
Right.
yesterday kind of almost knocked me out.
Mm-hmm.
But cooked a proper Trini Sunday lunch in South Africa. So far so
I
good. No
saw
complaint.
that. Oh, how do you light the stove? Because I saw the pictures that you well set
Good.
up your macaroni pie and you didn't know how to light the
Turn
stove.
this, and turn that, and click this. It's a real contraction kind of thing. So I had to call and get some directions, but eventually I sorted it out.
Nice.
Took like 2 hours to bake a pie, but say what? Sometimes the end justifies the means.
I hear you, but I mean, it's nice to see that you're in a position to carry on with the same activities that you'd have been carrying on with here. Because I know you used to regularly cook and put up pictures to frustrate me. So
Frustration is one of my strong points, as
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I realized that the
Frustrating.
change in time zone and the change in work not making a difference. You're going to continue to frustrate me.
Well, technically, because of this job, I'm supposed to have a maid, a butler, and a chef. That's a bit very,
That's a
very
bit
kind of
much for
elitist.
you. That's a bit much
Yes,
for you. How you gonna
not
manage that?
much. I'll do my own cooking. I mean, I don't want to deny anybody employment, but that's a lot of people to be in the house milling around. So I'll see how it goes, but I don't mind doing my cooking for myself.
I know that. I know
And
that.
I'm not like
I I
I'm not
know.
the type to enjoy servitude on my behalf.
Okay, well, I mean, maybe your days may get hectic to the point where you'll be grateful for the help. I don't know. I can't say. I mean, we will touch base from
Yes.
time to time to know how things going.
We'll see how it goes. But so far, I can handle it.
I wanted to also say congratulations. Let me see if I can pull this thing up properly. I want to be able to pull it up and show the cover. That's what I want to show. I want to show the cover. You
What in
notice
this book?
yeah, the book, of course. Of course, I want to show the book. So there we go. Just now, let me add you. Just now. Just went on here. Right, Rhoda? Right, so there you go. And let me add me. So congratulations on the book. How are you feeling?
Thank you.
How are you feeling after having, finally gotten it out of the way? Because I knew when you had started writing it, and then I knew when
Yeah.
you were on the verge of submission.
Well, we've been talking a while. I mean, we were talking years about
Mm-hmm.
writing a history of Trinidad
Mm-hmm.
that was readable,
Mm-hmm.
that would be accessible, that was enjoyable, that was a bit plain spoken as opposed to doing all of the hemming and hawing that as
Yes.
academics we sometimes forced to do. That would be also entertaining to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I've really wanted to do this for years, but never sat down to do it. So the pandemic gave me a chance. So I mean, I'm kind of happy to have it out. I hope people enjoy it. I
Yeah.
hope they read it.
I've
And
been I've been dipping into it and thoroughly enjoying it. Entirely
you
enjoying it.
there'll be excess mischief, but it's part of the course. You can't fight that with me.
No, we can't fight that at all. Now
Okay.
I need to fix this picture in picture thing here. Move you. Oops, no, take you out entirely. Sorry about this, huh? I mean, from time to time, I forget how to do some of the things that I meant to be able to do on this.
Happens when you do too many things at the same time. That happens.
Boy, tell me about it. Right, there we go. We all back up
All
and
right.
running. So,
No trouble.
all right, let me start from the top with me and this particular topic. Years ago, now World War II is not new to me. I studied World War II. I mean, World War II was always something that I was fascinated by. So from the time I was a teenager in my early teens, any movie that was set in World War II, I was avidly looking at, especially stuff to do with the Holocaust. Then when I did my undergrad degree, I would have had Dr. Oh my goodness, he had the long beard. He also did Indian
Homicide.
history. Parmasad, that's it. I had Dr.
Yeah.
Parmasad teaching me European history, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. But when we looked at when we looked at the war, it was really in Europe, right? So I've always been very comfortable with looking at things that happened from 1848 come all the way down into the 20th century and seeing the links between all of those various revolutions and how they fed into World War One and then World War Two. And to me, World War Two is just like a kind of bookend to World War One because to me it
Yeah.
started all the way back then.
Because of the magnitude of the villainy in World War II and the outsized figures, people tend to think that that was really the major event of the 20th century.
No, but it was
The
really
major event
one.
is actually World War, is
Yeah,
actually World War One.
yeah. World War One is a
World War
major
One
event,
took place
but I hear you.
for
I
everything that happens in the 20th century,
Yeah,
almost.
I know that a lot of people think World War Two is, and I also think it's because there's so many movies done
It's
about
just the
World War
loudest.
Two.
It is the some of it is the Stalin, the Hitler. World War One doesn't have those megalomaniac figures.
Yes.
It doesn't have those famous names. It doesn't have those crimes that will last for millennia that will be remembered. So it is like a bigger, louder sequence, like a bad Michael Bay movie.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
that's a redundancy. It's like a Michael Bay
It's like
movie.
exactly. It's like a Michael Bay movie.
Right? So
No need
the
to
bad
over.
is unnecessary.
Yes,
But World
bad
War
is
One was really
understood.
pivotal event.
Right.
World War One was a pivotal event. World War Two is just the louder sequel.
Right. So I would have read this trilogy from Ken Follett called the Century Trilogy. And it was only in reading the Century Trilogy that I began to understand how much of an impact the war had on the Western Hemisphere. Because I was always focused on the war and its impact in Europe and parts of Africa. And even in the Pacific, right, in Japan, but never really thinking about it here in the Western Hemisphere beyond knowing, yes, we were occupied, there were bases here, people in the Caribbean went and fought on behalf of Britain in the war. And then in reading that book, I saw the impact. I saw the impact in the New World. And then when I started digging a bit more, I realized that while there were 7 bases in Trinidad and Tobago, that's only the surface of what took place here. The Trinidad, well, because Tobago, even though it's Trinidad and Tobago, there was no base really in Tobago. Trinidad was the focus. Trinidad played a really critical role. Now there were bases in Jamaica, St. Lucia, Bermuda, but there wasn't the same degree of occupation by the Americans here. Because I've always wondered too, how did we go from having strict, let me not say strict, from British French tastes to having all of the Americanisms that we have, because we differ from the rest of the Caribbean in that way, from the rest of the English speaking Caribbean in that way. We're more Americanized in terms of our behavior. So in digging up in this, that's when things hit me. And I said, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about the impact. And I needed to be able to talk about it with somebody who was more informed than I was. And I reached out to you. So I'm glad that you did all of the extra reading that you did this week. Because I know I gave you plenty of homework.
You're assuming I actually had to, but anyway.
Well, all of the
All
extra
right.
thinking, because I
But I
know.
want to correct. I want to correct one of the things you said, that there were
Sure,
7 bases in Trinidad.
sure.
As we were discussing previously, on the surface there were 7 bases in Trinidad, but the reality was that Trinidad was a base.
The
The
whole,
entirety of
the
Trinidad
whole, the whole
was
country.
a base. Those maps that you were telling me about that detail the major roads, the minor roads, almost sometimes the tracks, to do with the fact that Trinidad was almost, it wasn't, maybe, it probably weren't in numbers here to be considered a garrison island, but it was effectively a garrison island. I
It
was telling
was.
you
It was.
that way down in Muruga, down Laloon, there's an American bunker. There were, I think, 1 or 2 others scattered through Muruga somewhere. So there were weapon caches just in case. Trinidad was not just a place where there were bases. Trinidad was a base, and more than that, when we discussed the agreement that kind of led to this thing, Trinidad was the one that they really really wanted. The others were important,
Yeah.
but Trinidad, because of they were trying to create a sort of an arc along the archipelago, but Trinidad was the one that they really wanted because of where we were situated.
So let
So I
let
can explain
let me
this.
ask you to explain to the audience how exactly did it get to the point where Jamaica, St. Lucia, Bermuda, and Trinidad became bases
All
occupied
right.
by the Americans?
The long and short of it is an agreement called lend-lease. But I need to explain the context. Now, we talked about World War One. 2 decades later, you have, well, less than 2 decades later, you have World War Two. The Everybody and the tanty, the grandmother, the nenen, anybody who had any kind of sense, when the 1920s rolled over into the 1930s, would have known that another major war was coming. It was not a secret. The one thing you could never accuse Adolf Hitler of was subtlety. This man was not subtle. He was bold-faced in the worst kind of way in history. So, if you were really looking at the politics of the world, viewing the politics of Western Europe, you would have known that a war was inevitable. The British knew war was inevitable. Now, I've seen people try to revise and talk about what they were doing with all this appeasement with Germany, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But anybody who had any understanding at all of the politics of the time knew that this thing was coming. And it came, and I will say the British were both prepared and underprepared. Now, I'm sure you've heard of the Battle of Britain, where they held off the Luftwaffe and they fought and they made sure that Hitler's invasion couldn't come. That is presented as some kind of plucky story of David beating Goliath, blah, blah, blah. It's really nonsense. The British have been preparing for that for years. They were ready, they were drilled, the RAF was ready, so they were ready for that onslaught. They were prepared. They actually beat off the Germans because they were prepared. What they were not prepared for was the faced onslaught of that blitzkrieg on continental Europe, and they were not prepared for that. I mean, that fast-moving aggression of the Japanese in the Pacific. So basically, a situation between 1939 and 1940, the British are getting a royal cut, you know what, everywhere. They're getting licks in Africa, they're getting licks in Europe, they barely escape at Dunkirk.
Yeah.
If you've seen the movie
Yeah,
Desperate,
I saw Dunkirk.
they were getting their tail cut in the Pacific. So you know this war coming. You're preparing for the war, and when it hits, they're not ready.
So
They're getting their tail.
so
So
go ahead. Go ahead.
so it's looking like by 1941 that Germany can wrap this thing up and Japan can wrap this thing up. Now America at that time was but but they have their preference. Now, you know, America's always had this internal dynamic between looking outward and looking inward. There were those who wanted them to get involved in the war within America. There were those who were anti-war.
So
So
stick up
Roosevelt
in.
just
Stick up in. I
yeah.
want to add to what you're saying there. In reading, and it's just underscore what you're saying. I read that there were some groups in the United States that actually wanted the Americans to side with the Germans. Right. And then, of course, there was some persons who
There was
wanted to side with the Allies.
German support. There was significant German support during the war. During the war, even when America got involved, there was still significant German support. What happened is that this yellow country attacked America, and that tilted it in a way that the argument was over. You can't leave that aspect out of it. There is a racist part in all of this. Anyway, so Britain's getting a royal cocktail. They turn to America. They are allies, but America is neutral. And they work out this kind of backdoor deal called lend-lease. Now, lend-lease also, America had a similar deal with the Russians where they provided them equipment, but we leave that right there. So, thing is this. We will give you 50 obsolete destroyers. That's a very small, very fast naval ship. Very good for destroying submarines. And if you know anything about World War II, that German U-boat fleet, they were terrorists. They were sinking millions of tons of shipping every week, every month. So having those destroyers would have been a good part of Britain sort of securing the Atlantic, or at least trying to, with those U-boat packs out there, just torpedoing everything. So we give you 50 obsolete destroyers. Can't be new ones because we're neutral and we don't want to get dragged into the war, break our own neutrality. So we'll give you 50 old ships, but you have to give us some territory. So we want these specific islands because we want to build a shield to protect the Caribbean Sea and to protect the Atlantic. And that's what the documentation says. But you and I have read what the American naval officers are really saying, which is the one we really want is
Was
ding, ding,
Trinidad.
ding.
When, Lovell, I'm
Want
not going to lie to you. When I read that in the document, the same document, the document that you read and the one that I stumbled upon, when I read that, my eyes widened, because, I mean, they said so plainly, the jewel in the crown is Trinidad.
it's
Trinidad is worth
basically
40 of the 50
giving you,
ships we're
we're
giving you.
giving you 50 ships, but really and truly Trinidad with 40 of those ships. Why? Because where Trinidad is, it's close to the Panama Canal. So anything coming from the Pacific through the canal, Trinidad. Trinidad is in the Caribbean Sea, so we could keep an eye on the Caribbean Sea. Trinidad is close to the Atlantic Ocean. So Trinidad gives you triple threat defense. So we want Trinidad.
And then
So
another thing that in the documents was that based on our location, once they put up the airstrips here, flying from here to Africa, because remember there was the North Africa campaign as well. Flying from here to Africa was not that difficult for them either.
no. So Trinidad, just like with El Dorado and all that nonsense I described in the book, Trinidad is ideally located for hemispheric defense in World War II. So what you have very quickly in 1941 is thousands of American troops landing here. Massive amounts of equipment, warships. Trinidad becomes a massive, massive base. And the arrival of those military personnel and the culture they bring has a tremendous impact on life in Trinidad and Tobago, but life in Trinidad in particular. I don't know how far you've reached in the book. One of the later chapters, I tell a story about sugarcane workers. I don't know if you
No,
actually glanced it.
I ain't reached that story yet, but bear in mind that I'm very familiar with your thesis.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm not sure if I put this one in the thesis because us academics you always want to have a ace up your sleeve later
Yeah.
on. Right. So I'll tell you the story very simply, and this kind of gives us segue into discussing what we really want to discuss, which is the cultural impact.
Sure.
So I want to go back to the Moyne Commission, 1937. So we have the riots in 1937, the Butler riots. We've talked about this before.
Yes.
We've talked about the Moyne Commission coming here and basically saying that, in a way that was tremendously honest for a Royal Commission, saying that life in the Caribbean was hell. People were on the verge of starvation, the housing was terrible, everything was terrible. Life under colonial Britain was terrible. The Moyne Commission laid it out, more plainly than could be expected. Normally, those royal commissions would come and they would figure skate. I wouldn't say tap dance. They would figure skate around the truth. The Moyne Commission just pulled off the mask and told the truth. Colonialism was hell for Caribbean people. So the commission comes to Trinidad and they ask for submissions and they get one from the sugar manufacturers. And I have that submission home, which I could actually send a copy. Well, I could have until a week ago sent you a copy. And the commission asked the sugar manufacturers whether their workers are starving. The manufacturers literally say yes, but that is their problem because they want to send money back to India and they don't want to eat properly, and that's not really our concern. We just want higher sugar prices from the crown. That is literally their response. We know the workers are starving. We know we underpay them. We don't care. All we want is higher guaranteed prices, and if we get that, all will be fine because we will be fine. So they have no concern with the welfare of their workforce. Bear that in mind. 1941, American Yankees land in town, and they need to build these bases quick, 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 double quick. So we know where the major bases are located, but to get the labor force to pull off these massive bases really, really fast,
Can I list where the
you have
bases
to
are for the audience, just
get
in
it right.
case?
Yeah.
Right. So, to the best of my knowledge, it's about 7 bases in total. I'm not sure if I have all 7 listed here. So, Piarco,
Let's get the
Wallafield,
major ones.
right?
Well,
Piarco, Wallafield, Carlson Field, and I know there's the
yep.
one in Couva, Cedrus, and then there was a landing strip in Toku.
And don't forget Chagaramas.
Right, and Chagaramas.
The copy of them all. Right.
Yes.
So those are the major bases. You want to build them in double time. You need a massive workforce. You're not going to get all of it from urban Trinidad. Basically, going to recruit workers from all over the country. So American soldiers literally go onto the sugarcane plantations with their lorries and recruit sugar workers to go and build these bases.
Well,
And
that changes how people work.
of course, the enticement is US dollars. So you have people who are malnourished, who are, and the Moyne Commission literally says starving. So let me use the word they use. Starvation wages in the literal sense, not the imagined Trini sense of today. Literal starvation wages, where you are getting paid a wage, you are working every day, but you are on the verge of starvation. We mean that literally, not as a hyped up metaphor. Starvation wages. These American soldiers drive their jeeps, their lorries, to use the English word, onto the sugarcane plantations, up to the factories, and they literally load up these sugar workers, these Indo-Trinidadian sugar workers in majority, and take them to these base sites, pay them in US dollars, which nobody in the country can match, and these sugarcane workers abandon sugar, and sugar almost collapses. In fact, The only reason there's a sugar industry after World War II is because the British government, for one of the very few times in colonial history, they take swift action to preserve a colonial industry. Normally, they would sit on their hands and watch it collapse, but for many reasons, including they don't want any disaffection. The riots just happened a few years before. Sugar is a vital war commodity. Sugar is a vital war commodity. Sugar is a vital war commodity. They act swiftly and they do all kind of madness. They give away money to the manufacturers to keep the thing alive. Interesting thing. So you have all of these rural, quote unquote, sugar workers going to these bases, interacting with these American troops, being paid massive amounts of money that they could never have imagined other than the circumstance. The war goes on, it comes down in 1945, and they come back to the plantation. You think they're going to be the same?
Nope.
Not going to be the same. The imagined docile sugar worker who left the plantation to go and work for the American is a very different person when he comes back. And if you look at the history, it was bacchanal from the time the war ended up until independence in the sugar industry. But we ain't here to talk sugar. But that is just to lay the context of what the arrival of the Americans did. And I want to say it very plainly. It was almost like, in a peculiar way, a kind of economic emancipation for people.
Explain
And
why you say economic emancipation.
I'll revert again. Trinidad was the richest colony in the latter half of the 19th century. It was, in fact, when they measure the value of export goods from the British colony, in some ways, from the British Empire, sorry, my bad, from the British Empire. You know, the British are very good at keeping records.
Yes.
They would measure the value of exports, not relatively. We're talking about in real dollars here. We at some years the value of our exports was so high that Trinidad would rank sixth in the British Empire. A British Empire that includes Canada, Australia, South Africa, India, a small island like Trinidad ranking sixth in terms of exports is mind-boggling. Trinidad was a very rich colony. Think about it. We had, and I'll use this word I really hate to hear, we had a very diversified economy. When sugar was collapsing in the rest of the Caribbean, Trinidad was still selling sugar and still making a profit because we modernized when they were falling apart. We were modernizing because we were newer than them. Second half of the 19th century, we have a massive cocoa boom until typical Chinese slackness, we undermine ourselves. We're selling people mud instead of cocoa beans and they stop buying from us. But so you have a successful sugar industry that has some problems but survives, unlike Tobago or Montserrat or many other places. At the same time, you have a burgeoning cocoa industry between, let's say, 1870 and 1920, booming, 50 years boom. We had an oil boom that lasts 5, 10 years, and we celebrate. We had a boom for cocoa that lasted 50 years. A 50-year, people were getting rich overnight off of cocoa. And in the midst of that, we discover oil. Think about that. And then we become a major player in the British Empire because of oil. In fact, none of the reasons why the Americans were here was because Trinidad oil was a major part of the Allies' war effort. Small Trinidad.
It's one of the things that I read as well, that the fledgling industry at that point in time had their attention because they could use it for refueling purposes.
Yeah. But we had sweet oil. Sweet oil is very good for tanks. Sweet oil is very good for destroyers. Sweet oil is very good to make diesel for aircraft carriers. So you have a little island that is not only strategically placed, but is also relatively wealthy. You have 3 major industries and we do other things. And in the midst of all that wealth being produced, everybody in Trinidad poor. Except for a handful of people. Except for the elite. So you have this colonial paradox of great wealth being created and it's being shipped overseas. And what stays here stays in the hands of a few people And the masses, another word I hate, the masses are suffering in the midst of that. It's like being thirsty in the middle of a lake.
So, one of the things that I noticed, and this is how we get to talk about economic diversification. The Americans come, and it's not just the building of the bases. After they have the bases built, there are services that have to be provided to the bases.
You have to provide all kind of services. So people go from having nothing, from getting paid $1 a day, from getting paid 50 cents a day, for getting paid 30 cents a task or 15 cents a task, to being paid in American dollars. And you have all kind of services. You see that Gina and Dinah? You ever deconstruct that Gina and Dinah calypso? You have people being empowered. You have the rural workforce being empowered,
Not just the
seeing
men,
money for the first time.
not just the men, the women as well.
I get into the women, I want to get there.
Okay.
You have rural workers being empowered for the first time. You have sugar workers who making sugar every day but can't afford to buy a pound, not pound, a pound of sugar. All of a sudden getting paid and they could buy the commodities, they could buy saltfish, they could buy this. In the urban areas, people providing all kinds of services. And all of a sudden, women go through their own sort of emancipatory
Emancipation.
process. That Gina and Dinah song is a song that we really need to deconstruct. It's not just about prostitution. It's about a women for the first time in a real tangible way having the right to determine how their body is used, by whatever means, and making an economic decision, whether or not you agree with the decision, but having the agency to decide something. Look at the song. Gina Sparrow could only approach Gina and Dinah because the Yankees
Because the
gone.
Yankees have gone. Exactly. So in
The
the
Yankees
song,
gone.
there's a whole dichotomy there of women becoming empowered because the Yankees were there, and men, I
Yeah,
think, losing power, black men or Caribbean
yeah,
men, right? So local
yeah.
men losing power because of the presence of this foreign force. And it's only after this
Women,
foreign force is gone that men, local men, can find power again.
but you have to ask yourself if it ever goes back to what it was before. It
Of
never
course
goes back.
not. Of course
It
not.
never
The
goes
same
back.
way the workers who would have
Yeah.
left the estates to go and build the base.
Not the
Once they,
same.
after the war, they're not the same. And so women would not have
Not
been
the
the same
same.
either.
It's not the same. So Sparrow could say Gina and Dinah and them lying and he could approach them. No, but it's not the same. Those dollars, and it's not, and we could make a hullabaloo about prostitution, but it wasn't just that. It was. I remember talking to Marjorie Bootman. I was interviewing her for a UWI project, and she talked about being a dancer and being a sort of a, like a celebrity performing and singing, and there were people who were making a living, people who were being
There's a friend of
having
mine.
agency,
Yeah, there's a friend of
having
mine who's
agency.
who's on the comment thread right now. I know this about her. Or rather, I know this about her family history, and I feel I can say it. Her mother functioned as a laundress for some of the soldiers at the base. And the mother would have been, for the most part, a single mother, a single parent, from to my understanding. And that's how she earned a living. That's how she was able to look after her children. And I think she eventually migrated at some point. Not the lady's mother. And so the mother functioned as a laundress.
Yeah. So people doing mundane things or what we would consider mundane things that would have earned them scraps before, all of a sudden have a sense of they get a leap. They have a
Agency,
sense of
agency,
yeah,
because
they get
you're earning,
agency.
and you are earning far more than what you were told you were worth prior. So in
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
I mean, with the coming of the Americans, in 1 month you're worth very little. You're worth starvation wages, and then in the next
Yeah.
month you are being paid far more than you
Next
could ever
month,
imagine.
almost no. Next month, almost nobody local could afford to pay you. In the next month, almost nobody local could afford to pay you. So I mean, it didn't overturn the economic hierarchy, but it was the most severe challenge since the 1937 riot,
Yeah.
and its impact was fundamental. Another Sparrow song I want to talk about, that 10 to 1 is murder. So we could talk about the economic emancipation,
Yeah.
but we're really talking crime here.
Yes.
That's another topic. So we need to deconstruct. Now, if you know anything about American history during the war, interwar period, there was a lot of gangsterism. We had prohibition, which ironically, but also fittingly, because this seems to be always be the case, when you ban something, you make it more, appealing, make
Attractive,
it more
more
popular.
appealing. The desire
People
for
want
it
it.
increases.
So America bans alcohol, and all of a sudden, not too long after, you have people like Al Capone making massive fortunes off of all these illegal activities. So there was a certain gangland crime culture in America in the interwar period, and all of a sudden you have thousands of American troops here from all over the country, and they bring their culture with them. So it's no surprise all of a sudden Shadow is a man with a white handle fighting a man with a white handle razor, because just like when America changed that policy in the 90s, which led to them sending all of these deportees back, that changed the culture of crime in Trinidad, something we have not seriously focused on enough. How our culture of crime changed, who were the actors, and how it was allowed to happen. We haven't really focused on that in this more recent history. You have a different culture of crime being important to Trinidad along with this American influence.
So here's what I
So,
want to ask you. As you're talking
yeah,
about this new culture of crime that's being imported along with American influence, I want you to talk about how that imported crime culture fits into the culture of smuggling and contraband that we would have already had established here.
well, and I'm not sure if we've talked about it before, so let me backtrack.
Sure.
And I will use the same bad analogy I used before when we were just having the preliminary discussion. Smuggling is as Trinidadian as corruption. And that sounds bad, and it's also true. Why am I saying that? If you understand how these colonies in the Caribbean in the early modern period were set up, there was a dominant ideology called mercantilism, which was a very nice long word for really exclusive trade. Meaning, if you were English colony, you traded with English ships and you traded with England. French colony, French ships, France. Spanish colony, you have a problem.
Yes.
Because Spain is so concerned with only one thing, gold and silver. Spain is so unconcerned with islands like Trinidad that they're really not interested in having you in their network
So
because they're concerned with gold and
they
silver.
didn't have a lot of trade going on at all and they didn't
Spain,
have a lot to trade.
at first, they were strong but focused on that Peruvian silver and that Mexican gold. Then they were weak and they couldn't manage it anyway. But it made no difference to Trinidad whether Spain was strong or Spain was weak. No ships were coming to Trinidad. So if you were Spanish in Trinidad, the only way you could survive was by trading with foreign ships, whichever Dutch or English or French ships happened to pass by. And by law, that was smuggling, was illegal. So smuggling has always been an integral part of our culture. You told me about the sedular thing, which I maybe missed that clause, where basically Crown was, we want this sugar so
I
bad,
will
set
find
up this
it.
sugar.
I'll find it and send it to you
I
because
actually,
there is
I
a
actually have
whole.
I actually have the sedular, but I
Yes.
was so probably focused on the economic aspect, I didn't really look into the smuggling.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
basically, we wanted to set up sugar so badly that if you want to smuggle, we go just pretend we don't see it, kind of thing.
Let me tell you what it says. It actually says that once you own ships, you could use your own ships and leave Trinidad and go to the waters of other Caribbean islands and trade with the other islands or get the provisions that you need.
Which was illegal. By Spanish law, that was illegal. So the crown was actually telling you, break the law
We'll turn a
because of this
blind
concept.
eye. We will turn a
Blind
blind
eye
eye.
because we want this sugar industry so bad. So smuggling has always been a part of our landscape. We just, like to pretend it's not the case. So you have World War II, you have American troops, you have fast life, you have night life, you have American movies, you have rum and Coca-Cola. You have severe restrictions because it's a war.
Yeah.
The Germans are sinking ships. Food is rationed. You get 5 pounds of flour a week, 5 pounds of sugar, 5 pounds of rice. Isn't that going to provide a perfect avenue for a massive rise or a massive outbreak or interest in smuggling?
Of course.
Anytime there's deprivation, there's somebody who's going to make a dollar from providing things that are hard to get. So it's no. And remember, I'll say it again: in the war, when you have a colony where everything you eat, or the majority of what you eat, or the vast majority of what you eat,
Is
is
imported.
imported, and there's a war that has a severe impact on the shipping lanes and on the ability of ships to bring stuff to Trinidad, there's going to be a perfect avenue for quote unquote black market, quote unquote smuggling. Yes.
So
So
there were
yes.
things like I'm seeing Barbara saying on the thread here that there was contraband from the base. There were false
Yes.
ration cards. Just much the same
Yes.
way we have you can have false vaccination cards. There were false ration cards.
Trinidad has always and interestingly always been Trinidad. And take that as you will. Trinidad has always been Trinidad. People
So
talk about corruption as though it is a new phenomenon. It's
it's
not
not.
new.
It's not a new
It's not.
phenomenon. So you're talking
It's not.
about the culture of crime that the Americans would have brought here from the United States into Trinidad. Elaborate on those features.
Well, if you're thinking about America during the 1920s, it's gangsterism, it's Al Capone, it's shootout, it's Bartholomew Day massacre, that massacre, Valentine's Day massacre, sorry. It is sort of an over the top kind of gangster culture that is going to end up, if not coming here full scale, is going to seep into the culture because it comes as a package. Because there's also this glorification in the movies, which is a thing I'm kind of, about saying, because it leads to nonsense arguments, but it cannot be ignored that this is coming as a package. It's music, it's culture, it's soldiers here, it's the music, it's the movies you go to watch, it is a mindset, it's an attitude, the correct word is zeitgeist, the German
Yes.
word.
Yes.
All of that comes as a package.
And then
So think about our most famous Calypsonian himself being a gangster. People think that Sparrow song was fictional. Sparrow actually made jail for being a criminal. This is not something that was just made up and sung just a song. Good. He was actually a petty crook. He was actually a petty criminal because that was the milieu in Trinidad at the time. The smooth looking, fast talking, well dressed, that kind of gangster look, that kind of
smooth,
Al Capone,
smooth talking, smooth talking.
smooth talking, quick stabbing,
That's it. Smooth talking,
quick
quick stabbing,
flashing,
well dressed. And when we talked
well
about
dressed.
Boise Singh last week, there was all of that. How charismatic he was, how well dressed
Yeah.
he was, the amount of jewelry he used to wear.
It was an American archetype that they were mimicking.
Yeah. But
That
then
came here
uh huh.
because of the war, or as part of that package that came with the war.
And then the Americans left in what between 47 and 49, depending on
Yeah.
which base you're looking at.
Well, the war ends in 45, but they're not going to draw down immediately. They're going to have a um,
Yeah, phased
phase
withdrawal. Phased withdrawal.
utilization. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so they
But the
would
culture
have
is already here. The
the
culture is already here.
yeah.
The
There's
culture is
also
already
but
here.
there's also a vacuum left now because the flow of forex that would have changed. You no longer have the Americans here. You no longer have the bases needing to have the same level of services being provided, and so of course access to US dollars would have changed.
Well, look, people go back in many cases to what they were doing before. I talked about the sugar workers.
Yeah.
They go back. But the fundamental point to understand here is that nobody goes back into the hole that they were before, into the slot that society said you had to be in before. This was a watershed event. World War II and that American influence here was a watershed event. There was no going back to what was there before. And it happens on all levels. Before this, Crown Colony was, a bastion. You could assault it, but it was so strong that that only ended one way. The fact that America comes in a very interesting way that we don't discuss enough. That American influence undermines British colonialism,
Yes, it does.
undermines British colonialism. Crown colony is no longer as strong as it was before. The workers are no longer as fearful or as pigeonholed as they were before. Women are no longer as dominated as they were before. Rural workers, all of a sudden, who would have never been thinking union before because the idea would have been so far beyond them, are now not only forming unions, but they're fighting for those unions to be recognized. Nothing is the same. Also, crime and criminality are not the same.
No, crime and
Ah,
criminality is not the same at all. So there are a couple of things that occurred to me while you were talking there. So
yeah.
our first election where everybody was able to vote was 1946, not so?
Yep.
Right.
Yes.
So I would imagine that the American presence would have influenced that as well. How the numbers in which people would have gone out to vote.
I mean,
And
that's a larger progress. That's a larger process. We've been fighting. People were fighting against Crown Colony for a long while. In fact, I can make the argument that Cambule, the Jose riots, the 1903 burning of the Red House, all we could do against this thing was to flare up and destroy something. But it didn't really weaken the system.
right.
But the Americans come here and they supplant British colonialism with American economics, but also American colonialism. And there is racism and all of that as well. We can't deny that. But their presence here and the fact that people not stupid. They understand that America being here, and I don't want to use the word emasculate, but in a way it kind of does maybe. It takes off some of the sheen of that British imperial facade.
Yeah.
It's not the same after.
No, it's not the
It's not
same.
the same after.
Now, there were a couple things that I, when I started paying attention, well, one, as I was telling you, before we got on air, I was telling you, I grew up in Chase Village, which is right next to Carlson Field. Then, of course, I knew about the Cedrus base because I had done an archaeology dig down at Cedrus. Then there were one or two other bases, but I was thinking to myself, the entire time I grew up in Chase Village, there were two whorehouses in Chase Village. And now I'm thinking to myself, I'm wondering how much impact did the presence of the base across the highway have because what I would have noticed was where you have a base, whatever towns were just on the outskirts of that base area, that's where you would have clubs, like nightclubs and whorehouses. So Carlson Field on one side of the highway, and of course the highway was American built. Chase Village on the next side of the highway, and there were at least two whorehouses. One is Rich Gold, and the next one is Dad's Dance. So I was just wondering, and in my mind, I was just like, I wondered if there was a connection there because it would have been the same thing with Chagaramas. It would have been
In
the
the ancient world, the Roman army was the most organized, structured, effective fighting force. Once they could fight as they wanted to. But everywhere they went, they carried prostitutes. And the prostitutes had their own assigned part of the base. And there were rosters as to how the men could visit the prostitutes in the ancient world, the Roman army. This has been a staple of warfare and military life forever. So if you have hundreds of well trained, very dangerous military men, because we forget that soldiers sometimes are trained to kill. You're not trained to talk or not negotiate. Effectively, their training is to kill you. I had a friend who was in the army who would try to demonstrate to me that he could kill me with a straw. I was like, I don't need a demonstration. Thank you very much. You have thousands of military personnel in the height of the biggest war the world has ever seen. And they're here. What do you think would happen? Something had to take off the edge of them. To use a bad phrase. So one leads to the other. So it's no surprise that becomes a big thing. And it's also no surprise that areas where this would have been unacceptable, it would have been unthinkable, it suddenly becomes normal
So
because the context changes quickly.
right. So I'm listening to what you would have said early on, which is,
Yeah.
the Americans would have left, but people didn't go back to
No,
how they
really.
were before. So a lot
No.
of these houses of refuge, as it were, remained. So because there are a number of these areas where there are bases, where I know some of these houses of ill remained, or places of repute, ill repute, would have remained. And so I'm thinking
So
it didn't
it,
leave.
isn't, it wasn't that these places didn't exist before the war. They were there, but they would have been frowned upon. They would have been not considered something in British society. During the war, they would have been normal. And then after the war, you have this kind of a like balancing where it's there, but it's not there. We know, but we don't know.
Well, it's
Not,
normalized in a
not,
sense, and you speak easy about those places.
it's normalized.
Now,
It becomes
I'm saying that those two places were specific to that era. I'm just saying,
but just the
yes,
kind of thing happening.
the kind of thing happening, and the fact that it just seemed to be accepted and a given in the
And
village.
don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if they are modern incarnations of something that was there before.
So that's what I'm thinking. That
Yeah,
the two places that I know about currently, they may
yeah,
have been, in a past iteration, the same sort of place was there. And so you just have,
yeah.
new management or new persons having purchased or whatever. But I just thought it was interesting that, Chase
Everybody
Village is
working
where it
through.
is. Carlson Field is where
Yeah,
it is. And Cedrus, I know has one or two places like, and along where some of the other bases are. Certainly the one that was in Chaguaramas, I know Caranage had at least one, and I'm seeing Barbara saying two seaside places of recreation for the soldiers and them.
brother, working for the Yankee dollar. Honestly, dishonestly, legally, illegally, directly, indirectly, working for the Yankee dollar.
Now they leave the bases, they decommission the bases, they move on, but they remain in the energy sector because the Americans don't leave our energy sector after World War II has ended. And that's where I think that's where the economic shift went to thereafter, where persons who needed work started to then look for work.
You know, oil would have been there from the turn of the 19th century as an emerging industry. Because of the war, it becomes critical. It becomes a vital war asset. As I told you, our oil is ideal for a whole range of military uses. So oil industry doesn't look back. And then, as you said, there's that American influence in the industry. But there is a whole drawdown of British influence on all spheres that is replaced by American influence. So they leave militarily, but they never really leave.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then a lot of that burgeoning economy ends up, sort of entwined with them.
The
So,
last, the
so
la-
we can make the argument that British colonialism, starts dying. And I mean dying, not weakening, dying because of the Second World War and that American influence here.
No, I'm going
It's
to be in
in-
agreement with you. And I'll tell you
yeah.
why I'm in agreement with you. Because of literature, not because of history. Because, well, we talked about Sparrow songs, and for me, music is a kind of literature. But you have
Yeah.
V.S. Naipaul in Miguel Street, because he really, he chronicles how Port of Spain was impacted by the Americans. There are a number of chapters in Miguel Street that focus on that. George and the Pink House, when the soldiers came, all of those chapters focus on that. Then A Brighter Sun by Sam Selvon also looks at the impact of Americans here and how it shifted and changed culture here. So the final question I want to ask you is this: the Americans would have come and they would have come with their goods, because the soldiers wanted the soldiers ain't coming here to eat provision and saltfish. They're going to continue to eat American things on the American bases. And so, if you can elaborate
And
a
you said
bit on
before,
the cultural
you
impact.
said before, you said before the goods were leaving the base.
Yes.
You said that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just that the goods were for the soldiers and those who were working on the bases would have access to the goods. The goods left the base. So it wasn't just that those who were on the bases or directly involved in working there had access, the country had access. The goods filtered out. And in a way, our taste start changing because of that American impact there. And it becomes a slow creep. And then when the oil boom hits in the 1970s, it heads to the stratosphere. But we can argue with evidence that even though it goes to another level from the 1970s onwards, we get that taste during the war because the goods leave the base directly and indirectly. And we love it.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, yeah.
Lovell, thank you so much for having this chat with me about the Yankee dollar and the impact of American bases during World War II and how it would have shaped culture, the economy, and our tastes and the ways in which we started to view things like work and our own agency. I know it's really late for you now. It's almost 1 a.m.
Yeah, well, I'm a sort of a vampire, so I mean, it's not and I actually did sleep today in anticipation, so
Okay,
it's
good.
fine.
I'm glad to know that you got some rest today in
I
anticipation.
want to commend you. I
Sure.
want to commend you for the work you're doing, not just in terms of educating the public, but these historical discussions that we don't really have enough, and then the areas that we choose, which are not always mainstream points of discussion, but also very illuminating because the typical person would not make these connections. Often the typical historian doesn't make the connections.
Thanks.
And they leave parts of our history shrouded. So it's good on many levels that we have these kinds of discussions and we don't just keep talking about the same narrow tropes over and over.
Well,
As a historian, I appreciate that.
well, thank you very much. And I mean, I appreciate that I'm in a position to have people that I can have the conversations with, you know? Because
Yeah.
you're not the only person that I chatted with about this. I spoke to somebody who is he's involved in national security, and I gave him a call and I said, you have a couple of minutes to me?" And we were talking about crime in general in the 20th century. And in the course of talking, he mentioned the impact on cultural tastes with the with World War II. But prior to that, and you and I we were discussing this off air, I was saying to you that I'd been reading this book by Francis Fukuyama, and it would have come off the heels of the podcast that I would have heard, where they were talking about how nervous the Americans were about the presence of communism in the Caribbean, and
Yeah.
this would have been around the time of World War II as well, and and then post World War II, and I thought, well, this would explain why Eric Williams was under so much pressure from the Americans.
Yeah.
It would also explain why people were up in arms about him pushing back about the Chaguaramas base. So
Yeah.
before we run off, can you just talk about how we got back the base? Because one of the things that struck me was that with those pieces of legislation, the oh my goodness, it's three pieces of legislation that caused us to lose the land. So it was the lease land agreement, defense regulations, and the Trinidad base agreement. And the Americans were able to kick landowners, Trinidadians who owned the land in the area, off the land, relocated
You know,
people to Carnage and
some of
St.
that,
James.
some of that, some of that lingers to this day,
Mm-hmm.
where people have been disenfranchised and have never gotten their land. Terrible things have been committed throughout history in the name of national security.
Yeah.
And that's a whole separate discussion. And the ideal test case for that is Latin America,
Yeah.
where there's actually a doctrine called national security doctrine, which is frightening and also tied to communism. But that's a longer discussion that
Yeah.
you probably don't have time for tonight.
Not right
But
now.
that I think Eric Williams understood the moment, and he understood that this was a fight to win
Mm-hmm.
as part of enfranchising people who had their property taken from them,
Yeah.
but also as in its own way a pivotal step on that march towards independence.
Mm-hmm.
But he would have had a very fraught relationship with the Americans throughout. There's a famous story of him going to some ball and meeting the American ambassador and telling him that there is something called American business and there is something called Trinidad business, and I would like you to mind yours and we will mind ours, and then walking out. He was that. No, he was a character.
That sounds like Eric. It sounds like
Yeah, he was a
like the
character.
prime minister that I heard about. There was a
Like
story.
when he went to Russia, like
Mm-hmm.
when he went to Russia, and he said something to who it was, boy. It was Brezhnev. No, it would have been Khrushchev.
Mm-hmm.
And he was told that he should stick to focusing on steel pan. And then there was a state dinner for him, and he went to the state dinner, and he took a book, and he sat in a corner facing the wall, reading the book throughout the whole dinner. Eric Williams. He was that kind of.
I remember a story that I heard from Michael Manley's daughter, Rachel. Rachel said to me that it, Eric Williams was giving a speech, I think, at the University of the West Indies, Jamaica, to students about the Caribbean economies and stuff. And they asked him a question about tourism, whether or not he was not going to make tourism into a bigger deal, a bigger thing for Trinidad and Tobago. And he said, I don't like entertaining guests. And that was like that's it just to the statement, right? I don't like entertaining guests. And I know that his view on tourism is that it was like, modern um col-
Yeah. He
colonization.
didn't. He did not. Now, I haven't said anything controversial yet.
Not yet.
I want to say,
I'm
I
trying
want
to
to say
keep
something
I'm trying to keep you in your job.
in, in, in my lane. In my lane. Yeah. So I won't make a direct statement, but I will say this. Many so-called third world people
Yeah.
to this day
Yes.
do not have the swagger, do not have the sense of self, do not have the things that we as Trinidadians take for granted.
Yes.
ha- it- They have not been allowed that even in their own
They
country.
don't have
And
the
I'm trying to be
tools.
very polite, so I'm choosing my
Yes, they
words.
don't have the tools of agency that we take for granted. And I genuinely think that it's only when
You stuck?
Trinidadians have had the opportunity to be outside of the Caribbean or outside of Trinidad, but not necessarily outside of Trinidad in the traditional New York, Miami, Canada spaces, right? Outside of Trinidad, in other spheres where they are there as persons of color, it is only then you grasp the levels of confidence and privilege that we have here in Trinidad and Tobago that we take for granted. And I mean, it's multiple layers of things that we are confident about. I've been in other parts of the world and seen people get nervous about seeing a. Oh wait, I didn't even realize it. Did you call me twice? What? What? Okay, I just I just deleted the second call. You called me twice, but now he's knocked himself out the call. So just to let you all know, if anybody now popping in, we're talking to um our current ambassador to South Africa, Lovell Francis. You're back. Nice.
Yeah, we seem to have gotten frozen there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just trying to make this final point, if you
Sure.
have the time,
Sure. Yeah.
that in a very real way, we were spared a lot of that neocolonialism that happened to many so-called third world countries after the end of colonialism, where there was a new colonialism imposed on us
Yeah.
or imposed on them. We were spared that because our first prime minister was adamant that we would not, after independence, become the servants of the people who had colonized us. He was
Exactly.
adamant.
And I
He
don't
was
think,
adamant.
I'm agreeing with you, I don't think that people understand what he spared us by us not going into tourism in the same way. Because tourism,
It
I don't
was
want to
just
say
one
it's a
example.
bad thing, but the way in
In
which we do tourism
the
regionally, or it
Caribbean,
has been done regionally,
yeah,
it it has been done in a very exploitative fashion here, and there's
yeah,
is very much we having to serve foreign persons who think that they are in positions of superiority to us, and
yeah.
us not having to do that, us not having to be reliant on being obsequious, not having to rely on being subservient to people continuously.
On tap dancing for $1.
Exactly. This whole shuck and jive for a dollar,
Yeah.
that has given us a different level of
Listen,
confidence.
right. Part of that Trini confidence, part of that Trini swag, part of that Trini, we will not accept certain kinds of treatment anyway. We owe Eric a debt of gratitude for that. Dr. Eric Williams, let me be respectful
Yeah.
for that, for
Yeah.
laying that foundation, for making that choice. It might have cost us in some ways, but in terms of our identity and sense of self, we would not be the people we are today with small island soul, with ego big soul,
Yeah.
sense of self big soul, confidence big soul. We would not have that psyche without that fundamental decision being made.
Yeah. But I mean, I have to play devil's advocate here and say, at the same time, with all of that, that big ego means that we've never really learned how to treat ourselves well.
Yeah, because
So
a lot of it is really a front, and we
yeah.
could go into looking at the psyche and what it really means and what it really the
Yeah.
publications of it.
Yeah.
But we have been scared. We have been scared in a way that many so-called third world people, many former colonial people have not been spared.
Yeah. I'm in
We
agreement
have
with
a
you there.
we have a dignity. We have a dignity in our country, and we have a dignity worldwide that we carry with us that many people can only imagine.
Yeah.
Take it from me.
It's just the I mean for me, my one thing with respect to tourism is that, because I'm not a huge proponent of tourism either, in that, or
I'm
rather I
not.
should say, the way in which tourism has been done in the Caribbean.
Well, we could do it differently. I mean, there's always scope to do things differently.
No, there are
We
there
could
is scope
focus.
to do things differently. You see, I
Yeah,
visited other parts of the world where the way in which they do tourism is not in
it's
that same
different.
master slave obsequious
Yeah.
sort of mode. So we can do it that way. And in those countries that I visited where tourism is done differently, it's done to make the country accessible to its citizens. And for me,
As
that's
well.
the
Yeah.
issue with tourism in the Caribbean. They 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 make the country exclusive for tourists, and so persons who are the local persons, they can't access certain goods and services unless they have, a certain kind of money. And I think the
Yeah.
way in which you're doing tourism in any country, you must make the space welcoming to the locals. And so other people come and visit it and benefit from it, yes, but we have to benefit from it first.
Yeah.
It can't be that things are locked off and you could only treat people nice if they have a certain currency in their pocket or a certain complexion. That's not what tourism is supposed to
And
be.
high quality infrastructure is only for certain places
Yeah.
because the tourists go there and the rest
Yeah.
of us,
And the rest
you
of us,
know,
and we don't deserve high quality infrastructure in other
yeah,
parts because you're only putting good infrastructure in certain places. So
yeah.
those are my concerns with tourism, because I don't want people to feel like anti-tourist tourism, and then
No,
they
no,
say,
no.
I'm being attacked
It's
for that.
it's how it's been done.
Yes, exactly. It's
And
how it's
and,
been
and
done.
there, And there are different pathways that can be followed and different
Barbara's making
templates.
a really good point here. She's saying that the way tourism is done, it alienates the local population. And that's my
Yeah.
problem. I don't want
Yeah.
tourism that alienates the local population. In any case, I know you're a night owl, but I still don't feel that it should be imposing on your time any further because you probably have important diplomatic things to do very soon. So, Lovell, thank you so much for the time that you spent with us this evening.
As always, it was a pleasure.
Great. Take care. We will be in touch soon.
No problem. Good night,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Peace.
So, folks, I hope you all enjoyed that session as much as I did and learned as much as I did in talking to Lovell Francis, current ambassador to South Africa, about World War II and its impact on our culture here in Trinidad and Tobago. So there's a lot that has been going on with us. I see there are a number of stories in the papers this week, so you all look out for me. If not Wednesday, certainly Friday, we will have a long conversation about some of the things that have been popping up in the public domain. In the meantime, I'm going to log off and I will see you very soon.
Once more.
Take care, folks.